the title of my presentation is How English Teacher Education is Understood and Practiced in Brazil. I think it's not easy to give an overview of the Brazilian context because due to the diversity of the Brazilian context and the different positions of theoretical positions from different perspectives in Brazil. So the idea of my talk is to give a brief overview of the trends and how teacher education is seen in Brazil. So although there are national guidelines, national policies for teacher education in Brazil, such as the number of hours our future students are required to attend at university, and the number of hours they are expected to teach during their 2 last years in their BA courses, the pedagogical orientations and practices vary from context to context. In this presentation, I will highlight my perception related to some aspects on how teacher education is understood and practiced in Brazil. As far as teaching course, we say in Portuguese licenciaturas, such as language, education, math, and some other are concerned, let me first give an overview of some figures related to the number of students who start and drop out their courses. I found this particularly interesting because here you can see the number of students that drop out their courses in Brazil. And talking about the trends and the situation of teacher education in Brazil, I think it's also important to show the motivation of these students to attend the courses all over Brazil. As you can see, the number of the students that they give up the course is quite high. I'm just going to emphasize some of the states, that the researchers are here, and particularly the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, the number is quite high. 63% of the students, they give up the courses, although these numbers are not only for English language teachers, but they represent, for all the licenciaturas, the teaching courses in Brazil. For instance, in Mato Grosso do Sul, the number is 63, Minas is the second, 60.8, and then São Paulo, almost half of the students, 49.8, then Sergipe, I think it's better, 37%, Alagoas 33%, and then the south is a bit similar, and Rio Grande do Sul is quite high as well, 60.4%. So I think this is interesting figures to see, to talk about the situation of language teaching and the situation of the courses, there might have some implications related to methodology. It may be related to the aims of the courses, if this, the courses are attending the students' needs and other sort of things. So I think this number is quite interesting for us to think about the licenciaturas in general in Brazil. So I would say that several interpretations can be made from this map. One could infer that some teaching courses do not meet students' needs, although the word needs is quite problematic to be defined. Another reason to the students' lack of interest could be the low prestige in relation to educational courses due to the status of being a teacher in Brazil. I think not only in Brazil, but in other countries as well. Presumably in Canada, the situation is not so different. So, regardless of the causes, these figures can indicate that more debates can be made about how Brazilian teaching courses are understood and practiced. There are some national policies of the Brazilian education in order to attract more teachers. So in order to extend the offer of teaching courses, the Brazilian Federal Ministry of Education has proposed some initiatives to accredit the in-service teachers as an emergency program called PAFOR, National Plan for Teacher Education, up to year 9. This project started in 2009 in collaboration with CAPES, local states and cities. The courses focus on the first BA in teaching, the second BA for those who had a certification in other fields apart from education, and also on pedagogical qualification. The target audience are in-service public school teachers without specific qualification. In 2012, there were 1,920 groups with a total of 54,000 teachers attending different courses in 397 cities in Brazil. So the Brazilian policies for teacher education has increased the access to higher education. However, one aspect that has to be rethought is the kind of education teachers are expected to have to face the challenges of our current society. Having problematized this issue, I will move on to English language teacher education. English language teacher education in Brazil has traditionally emphasized linguistics abilities, methods, and approaches, some of the aspects Andrea has mentioned before, as well as cognitive aspects of language teaching. In this sense, Cummings and Davison point out that all these issues are important to be considered by teacher educators and policymakers. However, they argue that when the technical questions of efficiency are analyzed isolated from their contexts, purpose, and policies, they have little contribution once they reduce language teaching to a set of prescription. I'm just going to show you this other slide. I think you are quite familiar with this slide here. I just added some new here. This is an interesting image to analyze how English language teaching is understood and practiced in Brazil. So this is, I think you are very familiar with this image in Valkyria's talk. And I also borrowed from Fabrizio. But he used this for another purpose, and I'm also reinterpreting again this for this talk here. But I think it's good for you to have an overview of how English language teacher education is seen and how English language teaching is taught in Brazil. Most of the main concern, I think, particularly the context that I know, they are more concerned with the practice, with the techniques, and less concerned with the philosophy or the approach. Even some contexts that are more concerned with the approach, some of them they are in the communicative approach, and then they know the kind of method and pedagogy related to that, and the choices of techniques as well. But I think this is one of the main approaches that the teachers are more clear about their practice. But and then we have other documents for the national Orientações Curriculares para o Ensino Médio, that this is the document that Valkyria and Lerimer wrote. This document presents another view of philosophy of education, and then we have pedagogy and practice. So these three are together. It's not something that is separate from the other. But I think that if we analyze from my experience with the students and with my experience with discussing teacher education with some other colleagues in Brazil, most of them they are more concerned with the practice or even the method. And most of these practice or tradition, they are from the private courses, the private English language courses, and they represent mainstream notion of language, culture, method, education, and so on. So in this sense, the tradition of English language teacher education has followed a view of training. Again, Andrea has mentioned this before, based on the studies of methods and approaches. Several approaches on English language teaching and teacher education, particularly in the 80s and the 90s in Brazil, were developed based on these perspectives. Despite of the number of research and the attempt of the communicative movement in Brazil, very few contributions were made to the Brazilian public schools. This approach, according to Matos and Valeria, has emphasized the cognitive aspect of language and the development of the communicative competence dissociated from the educational purpose. Another focus on English teacher education has relied on the development of teachers' competences. Arguably, this module cannot respond to the complexity of the changes in the contemporary society. The focus on teachers' beliefs has also been influential in teacher education in Brazil. This kind of approach tries to explore the cognitive aspect of language learning through protocols, confirmation of hypotheses, among other aspects. Two other perspectives have been very influential in some parts of Brazil. the discursive social interactionist approach, and the critical reflective teaching. The social interactionist approach takes into account genre theory. Researchers from this group have created the concept of didactic sequence, and they have provided some guidelines that teachers can follow to plan their lessons. Critical reflective teaching aims at promoting reflection on the teachers in order to reach the goals that were previously planned in the process of collaboration of a researcher for a critical action. This kind of approach is highly controlled by the researcher. Some of the steps, such as describing, informing, confronting, reconstructing, are used in the critical teacher's reflective process. But at the end, the teachers are going to reflect on what the research had previously planned. You know, they can be critical, but according to the researcher. But this is one perspective. You know, it depends on the view of the researcher as well. Another trend has increased in English teacher education. Refers to those who are in favor of a more critical linguistic education, such as Montemor, Menezes de Souza, Rojo, among others. It takes into account some new digital epistemologies, critical philosophy of language, post-structural view of language, among others. Furthermore, the critical aspect has also been explored by discourse analysts, both from French School of Discourse Analysis and Critical Discourse Analysis. Despite several theoretical orientations in teacher education in Brazil, Paiva points out that the limitation in relation to pre-service education and the lack of specific modules in the BA programs regarding to teacher education, as well as the lack of resource on cursos de letras and language courses, these are one of the limitations and the problems. Cummings and Davidson, for instance, have criticized that teacher education and language teaching programs have overemphasized the use of theories. These authors point out that there are very few researchers which focus on the role of theory in the mediation, the relationship between policy and practice. They say that it is very common to hear discourse of proposal introduced to teachers as only theories. This view represents a misunderstanding about the role of the theories about the facts. In this sense, Britzmans call attention to the fact that theorizing represents orientations to teachers and requires an understanding not only of the school systems and ability to teach, but also it contributes to strengthen teachers' theoretical identities. Theory has to function not only to raise questions that is happening in the classroom in a more restricted way, but it is also important to investigate the interaction in the classrooms. In this sense, Cummings and Davidson point out that there is a two-way road between theory and practice. Practice makes practice, and it also acts as a new way to find other directions to make and for theory in a dialogical relationship. Practice informs theory, and theory informs practice. In this perspective, I have worked with teacher education, particularly interested in the concept of teachers as policymakers. I have proposed to teachers to deal with theory and practice through official documents. In a 3-year collaborative work, teachers reinterpreted 2 official documents, My State Document and Federal Guidelines for the high school segment. This work has contributed to teachers to rethink their theories and reinterpret them to their local context in a more critical orientation. I had also the opportunity to rethink my own theories about the role of teacher education. So my intention with this brief talk was briefly highlight my view of English teacher education in Brazil, and I would argue that more research on teacher education, particularly new proposals for public schools that do not follow mainstream models, are required. Thank you.